Did you know that Tor, the Onion routing network, and F-Droid, the open source Android alternative app store, and Let's Encrypt, which provides SSL certificates for people's websites, are all taxpayer funded by US taxpayers? They are. Well, they have been to the tune of some quite hefty price tags, but not anymore. As of just a couple of weeks ago, the Open Technology Fund, which provides the funds for all these organizations, has stopped receiving federal funding. And the Open Technology Fund has taken the Trump administration to court to get that funding reinstated. Now, and as I've jumped down headfirst into this crazy labyrinthian rabbit hole, I started to notice a lot of common names kept popping up as I was looking into Tor and as I was looking into Let's Encrypt and the Open Technology Fund and all these different organizations. I started seeing names that I've recognized in a lot of other reporting, including reporting of Mozilla. There are some very, very weird, very shady connections between all of these organizations. I'm going to get through all of that here. Let's start with March 21st. So March 21st of this year, about 6 days ago, the board chairperson of the Open Technology Fund made this announcement. The Chinese government is spending billions and billions of dollars to erect the world's most sophisticated censorship apparatus. The Open Technology Fund is the United States' most efficient and effective tool to counter this malign influence. At a time when the Chinese government is doubling down on advancing online information controls, we cannot take this critical tool off the table. Doing so would drastically weaken American national security and leave millions of people worldwide trapped behind authoritarian information firewalls. As such, the OTF has filed a lawsuit yesterday as a last resort to contest the termination of our grant, which would cause irreparable harm to internet freedom technologies and their users in authoritarian countries, especially those in China. A little more from their statement here. In our filing last night, the OTF, the Open Technology Fund, asked the United States District Court for the District of Columbia to issue a temporary restraining order against certain actions taken by the U.S. Agency for Global Media, the USAGM, and the Office of Management and Budget. You see that one coming up a bit lately, huh? The lawsuit asks the court to immediately block the U.S. Agency for Global Media from terminating the OTF's grant and to release congressionally appropriated funds overdue to the Open Technology Fund that are being withheld by the U.S. Agency for Global Media. So what are we talking about here? Well, the Open Technology Fund has an annual budget, they say, according to their website, of around $40 million. If you dive into that, it's more like about 43, but close enough for our purposes here. And here's a screenshot of the lawsuit that they've filed here. This was filed on March 20th in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia against the U.S. Agency for Global Media, specifically naming Kari Lake. And those of you who are like, Kari Lake, I know that name. Yeah. Big supporter of President Trump, former reporter, and had run for a seat over there in Arizona in a very contested election. Well, she is currently acting as a senior advisor inside of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. So she's the one who kind of made the announcement that these funds were being cut. So let's talk about the OTF for a second. The Open Technology Fund. According to their website, their mission is simple: to advance internet freedom in repressive environments by supporting the research, development, implementation, and maintenance of technologies that counter censorship and combat repressive surveillance to enable all citizens to exercise their fundamental human rights online. I like a lot of those words. A lot of those words are really good. What does this really mean in practice, though? What does the Open Technology Fund actually fund? What do they do? Well, they do some kind of stuff that I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear. F-Droid. Now, a lot of people know as F-Droid as the plucky free software Android App Store alternative, right? Well, did you know that they are supposed to be getting for 2025 just shy of $400,000 from the Open Technology Fund. And from what I can gather, this looks to be a pretty significant chunk of their funding. That funding is now ended, right? At least as of right now, assuming the court doesn't provide some sort of injunction, that funding has now ended. Also, the OTF is spent last year $400,000, quote, strengthening the digital security ecosystem in the Eurasian region, which just is nice and bland. Or how about $110,000 for mapping DNS trends in Latin America? Okay, all right, but then you get down to it, and you've got things like Tor. What now? What's that you say? The Onion Network, the anonymizing network where you connect to a Tor node and your internet traffic gets routed through a whole bunch of routers and then spit out on the other side of the world. So it's really hard to trace what you can do. And a lot of people use it for dark web stuff and all those other things. Well, Tor last year received $464,000. The year before received $328,000, and funding to date over the last 2 years, Tor has received $800,000 from the Open Technology Fund. Now, in looking into it, it's actually kind of difficult to surmise what percentage of their funds this is, because weirdly enough, Tor is an incredibly closed off organization. The most recent financials they provide are for partway through 2022. Yeah, it's 2025, son. And they don't have any of those information. 23, 24, nothing at all. Now, it's not unusual for an organization to lag up to a year behind in reporting these sorts of things. The Linux Foundation, Mozilla, Wikipedia, etc., you won't find 2024's numbers posted anywhere. You just generally won't. Certainly not their IRS records. They tend to lag. They get every extension they can, and they tend to lag about a year behind. But Tor, having not posted anything since partway through 2022, is insane. But from the 2022 numbers, we do know that the Tor network is overwhelmingly funded by the United States government. I don't know if people realize this. 53.5% of all funds that Tor received back as of 2022, which amounts to $3.2 million, was from the United States government. Now, looking at the amount of money they've received from the Open Technology Fund and how that's been increasing over time, it's a fair assumption to think that those numbers have gone up over the last 2 years of reporting that they have not done. Because if you really dig into their IRS record, their 990, which ended, the last reported date we have is June 30th of 2022. The Open Technology Fund, as of that year, had provided $152,000. And now you'll know what are we up to now? We're up to $464,000. And the year before that, it was $328,000. I mean, it just seems to be going up every year. And so that percentage, I would guess, is going up higher and higher. Also, the United States State Department Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights gave them $2.2 million that year. Also, the Open Technology Fund also gives a fair bit of money to the Internet Security Research Group, which many of you will know as the organization behind Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt provides SSL certificates for lots and lots of servers. They're a certificate authority, and over the last 24 months, over the last 2 years, they've received $800,000 from the Open Technology Fund. Now, all of this money, with maybe a few pennies don't, but by and large, 90% comes through the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And on March 15th of this year, just 12 days ago, this announcement was posted. The U.S. AGM, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Senior Advisor Carrie Lake cancels obscenely expensive 15-year lease that burdened the taxpayers and enforces Trump and and enforces Trump's executive order to drastically downsize the agency. Today, in compliance with President Trump's executive order titled Continuing the Reduction of the Federal Bureaucracy, dated March 14, 2025, the U.S. Agency for Global Media initiated measures to eliminate the non-statutory components and functions to the maximum extent consistent with applicable law. The USAGM and the outlets it oversees will be reduced to their statutory functions, and associated personnel will be reduced to the minimum presence and function required by law. This action will impact the agency's workforce at USAGM, Voice of America, Office of Cuba Broadcasting, and all grantees. Most USAGM staff affected by this action will be placed on a paid administrative leave beginning Saturday, March 15, 2025, and remain on leave until further notice. Now, when you dig into the U.S. Agency for Global Media, there's a lot of organizations that sit underneath it that they consider to be entities of theirs. That includes Radio Free Asia and the Open Technology Fund. Those are right there. Now, just back to the lawsuit real briefly, because I want to look at the numbers here. So the lawsuit that the Open Technology Fund is specifically presenting to the United States government says the following. On February 26, 2025, the Open Technology Fund submitted its drawdown request for USAGM for operating funds in the amount of $655,000 to cover the period of March 1st through March 31st, consistent with the grant agreements. Now, the whole point behind all of this from the executive order from Trump was to basically put everyone on furlough, right? They're on paid administrative leave, and they're kind of dialing everything back down. Well, their operating expenditures for March, which is still ongoing, would be roughly $655,000. And so the lawsuit is saying you need to pay that right now. And they also go on to point out that 98% of the Open Technology Fund's operating programming budget comes from those federal appropriations from U.S. taxpayer dollars, which amounts to $43.5 million for each fiscal year. All right. So what exactly, let's look at this Open Technology Fund a little bit further here, because what exactly is this? Where did this come from, right? This clearly has a significant impact on multiple pretty hefty open source projects. Tor, F-Droid, Let's Encrypt. If you're a software developer or a systems administrator, odds are you've come across all three of those. So how did the Open Technology Fund come into existence and start funding these organizations? Well, let's go back to 2019. So in 2019, the Open Technology Fund, I'm just going to read this announcement that they posted in 2019, which is no longer available online. You had to get this from archive.org, obviously. The Open Technology Fund is proud to announce that we have, as of 2019, become an independent nonprofit corporation and the first ever U.S. AGM grantee dedicated to protecting human rights by combating online censorship and advancing internet freedoms worldwide. The Open Technology Fund was initially created in 2012 as a pilot program at Radio Free Asia, an affiliate of the USAGM. So Radio Free Asia it was created. So, okay. Backstory on this, because if you look up Radio Free Asia, you're going to find a couple of different things. There was a Radio Free Asia that was it was a CIA program back in the 1950s and 60s. This is not that. Same name, some of the same goals, but it's technically a different thing. Radio Free Asia was created after the Tiananmen Square massacre and was really created in the 1990s, the current Radio Free Asia organization. Reading from this quote here. Quote, billions of people in China, Iran, and other authoritarian countries rely on the technologies we support to circumvent repressive censorship, access truthful information, and communicate safely safely. These tools are essential information lifelines that must be preserved, says the Open Technology Fund president, Laura Cunningham. This lawsuit is a last resort to keep our tools online for people who need them most. Absent judicial intervention, which they're talking about this lawsuit again, over 45 million people in China, Cuba, Iran, Myanmar, and other repressive information environments will lose access to OTF-supported anti-censorship tools, blah, 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 blah. But the Radio Free Asia project is essentially a foreign propaganda arm of the U.S. government, right? And whatever you think of Radio Free Asia and the United States providing propaganda to other nations, that's what it is, right? Whether you like it or dislike it, it's what it is. It is a native language news outlets, sort of, that provide an American perspective, an American government-approved perspective to various Asian nations, right? That's what it is, right? It's a propaganda arm. And the Open Technology Fund grew inside of that, right? It started as a project inside of Radio Free Asia and then got spun out as its own nonprofit corporation. So technically, it's not a government agency, but it kind of is. It was founded within an agency that was created by the U.S. government, funded by the U.S. government, and continues to be solely funded by the U.S. government. And as you dig through the Open Technology Fund information, you start to see some patterns emerging, some things that really look pretty doggone familiar. For example, right here, when you look at the board members of the Open Technology Fund, quickly one name jumps out at you. Nicole Wong. You can see the picture here on the screen. Nicole Wong. Where do I know that name before? Well, she's a board member of the Open Technology Fund and the chairwoman of the board for the Mozilla Foundation. This is a new thing that has occurred. She was just named to be the chairwoman just recently, just in fact this last February. The Mozilla Foundation has been undergoing massive chaos, and they've begun appointing Democrat operatives to be board members at the Mozilla Foundation and all of the sub-foundations and corporations. And now the same person sits on the board of the Open Technology Fund and of the Mozilla Foundation. And just to show you some screenshots of Nicole Wong being deeply, deeply involved, not only was she a critical part of the President Obama administration, but she was part of the transition team and the transition and agency review teams for President Biden and Vice President Harris, including both the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the National Security Council. You find Nicole Wong's name at the bottom of all those lists. It's just a constant ongoing thing. It's fascinating that the same person is on both of those groups, which both receive federal funding through USAID or others. And then there's the Internet Security Research Group. When you get into the Internet Security Research Group, which provides Let's Encrypt, I mean, they do other things too, but they're known for Let's Encrypt. That's what they do. You start hitting the same exact sort of hey, I recognize that name. The board of directors for the Internet Security Research Group it includes Vicky Chin. Well, Vicky Chin is the vice president of engineering over at Mozilla, who here is part of an article that says, quote, Mozilla's vice president of engineering on retaining and promoting women and non-binary talent. End quote. This kind of goes on and on and on. Here's Josh Oss. Josh Oss is the executive director of the Internet Security Research Group, Let's Encrypt. Well, when he began being the executive director of the Internet Security Research Group, he was still working for Mozilla. He worked at Mozilla for almost 12 years and overlapped his time at Mozilla and the Internet Security Research Group by, 3 years? 3 years he was part of both. So it's deep, deep, deep connections. The same is true with Tor. Tor, Sarah Gran. Sarah Gran is an individual who is on the board of directors of the Tor project and is the vice president of the Internet Security Research Group. These groups are intertwined. The Internet Security Research Group, Tor, Mozilla, the Open Technology Fund are deeply intertwined. Every time you start clicking on the employee list or the board of directors list of these organizations, you find people from one of those others in bulk, and it's startling. And all of them are receiving federal taxpayer money. When you as an American pay taxes, it's going to these organizations, right? In fairly large numbers. I mean, we're not talking about billions and billions here, but we're talking about tens of millions. It's quite a bit of money every year. For example, the Lunduke Journal unveiled to the world that Mozilla does in fact receive USAID funds, and they're very upset that they won't be receiving any more USAID funds. And what do they use those USAID funds for? Well, they use them for social and political training, centering marginalized groups, and quote, this is my favorite, engaging race, gender, sexuality perspectives, end quote. And they do all sorts of other crazy things. Those of you who have watched the Lunduke Journal and listened for a long time know about their last year party that they threw in Africa for feminist, decolonial, LGBTQIA climate justice using AI. That's a real event. They threw this event at this big luxury resort in Zambia, I believe. And the whole point of the event was to promote those things, promote Marxism and anti-capitalist ideas. And that's not my phrasing, that was theirs. Like they were proud about all this, right? So they're doing all these things, but what you also start to notice is it's heavily focused on other countries. So the Open Technology Fund is primarily about taking U.S. taxpayer dollars and spending it on other nations. Very heavily focused on Asia, but also other nations as well as Africa and the like. Same with Mozilla. Mozilla has a huge amount of funding that they put towards Africa. In general, just a number of African nations, specifically promoting Marxism, telling people how bad capitalism is, promoting LGBTQIA++ climate justice. I don't know what any of that is, but they're promoting it, right? And we're seeing that over and over and over again. The same sort of things are happening with the Internet Security Research Group and Tor. And again, all of them are interconnected. I want to provide you with some thoughts on this, because there's a lot going on here. First, this whole connection between Mozilla, the USAID, the Open Technology Fund, the Democratic Party, and all of it is weird. It raises some eyebrows, right? Because they're all receiving a huge amount of taxpayer money. They're spending it predominantly on projects not within the United States. And they're all interconnected, right? One director of this company sits on the board of directors at that firm. One advisor for this organization is the chairperson of the board over here, and on and on and on. It's a interwoven spider web of people who are interconnected, and it looks dirty as all get out. It's also worth noting that a large portion of this money that's going towards the Open Technology Fund, that they're demanding they get back, is taxpayer money that's being spent on propaganda in other nations, right? Whether we're talking about Mozilla getting their US aid money, their USAID funds, they're spending that to promote Marxism and anti-colonialism and whatnot in other nations, right? Or the Open Technology Fund or Radio Free Asia, all of it are spending money to put propaganda, to put ideas into other nations and promote ideas in other nations, right? Now, when other countries do that to the United States, here in the United States, we scream about that. We call that election interference, right? You hear that every single election cycle. There's election interference, right? If someone from Russia spends $500 on an advertisement on Facebook that Bernie Sanders done in a cartoon or something like that, people scream for years and hold congressional inquiries about election interference. But here we are spending millions and millions and millions doing way, way, way more than that in other nations. It's worth noting that that is happening. Also, as we read through all this, you'll note that the SSL certificate authority that so many use, Let's Encrypt, I mean, one of the most popular certificate authorities of SSL on the internet right now, is predominantly funded by the United States government. Do we want that? I'm just putting that out there. Do we want that to be the case? A certificate authority is only good insofar as you trust them. What we have right now is a certificate authority that is managed essentially by Mozilla or ex-Mozillans or current Mozilla representatives or intertwined with Mozilla somehow and funded by the US government. Does that not raise anyone else's eyebrows? Like, did you go, red flag? Oh, that's a red flag. Whoa, that's another red flag. Because as soon as a certificate authority is not trusted, there are issues. It is very easy to have all sorts of crazy compromising things if a certificate authority is compromised. And this, I'm sorry, but this raises concerns for me. On to the open source funding thing, because we've got an issue here where the Open Technology Fund is funding something like F-Spot, right? The F-Spot open source Android marketplace. I like it. I use it, at least sometimes. And I like that there are alternative app stores on these platforms like Android. And I want to see those succeed. I want to see more of them. I want to see them do better. And so when I see them get funding, that makes me happy, because then they can provide more development, more testing, more infrastructure, more resources, more certainty that they'll continue to exist going forward. But here's the thing. If I like F-Spot, I'll donate to F-Spot. Right now, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars supposedly earmarked this year to go to F-Spot. And here's the chain of custody of that money. It goes from me, and I pay taxes to the IRS, which then probably jumps through several account systems, eventually finding its way to the USAGM, right, which then has to run its system somehow, which then sends its money onto the OTF, the Open Technology Fund, which then in turn sends money to F-Spot. How much money is wasted in that process, right? I mean, it's jumping through hoops. Even if everything is efficient as can be, and it never is, we're talking government here. Even if no one's skimming off the top, and again, come on. That's still an awful lot of work to get from me to F-Spot. That's wasted money, right? Over and over again, that's wasted money. And that raises a lot of concerns. So there's a lot of issues here. There's a whole lot of issues here. And honestly, this is just scratching the surface of the potential problems. Now, I'll be honest with you. When I read through all of this, I have a whole lot of opinions, and it's all over the map. The reality is some of these projects I like a lot. Some of these projects I kind of like, but I have some concerns about, and some of them I just don't like at all. It's all over the map. And I see the value in some of them. And I don't see the value in others. Like, it's really a mixed bag. It's a real mixed bag. I find myself thinking, with all of the dirtiness here, with all of the interconnectedness of Mozilla and the OTF and Let's Encrypt and Tor and everything all interconnected with the US government, my first inclination is shut it down. Shut all of it down. Do a scream test. Right? And for those of you who aren't familiar with a scream test, here's the idea behind a scream test. It's amazing. Let's assume you're working at a software company and you have a big server room filled with 100 servers, and some of them are old. Some of them are like 30-year-old servers, right? You've got an old Sun server sitting in the back, and you're like, man, does anyone even use that server anymore? I can't even think of what we use it for. and you ask around and no one seems to know, well, the great way to figure out what that server is used for is a scream test. Unplug it and see who screams. Because as soon as you unplug it, all of a sudden whoever needed it is like, wait a minute, something's broken, and they'll start yelling, and you're like, oh, okay, now we know what it's used for. Now we know who's using it, and we can really figure out really what's going on here. Do we really need it? Can we offload that to something else? Or is it really, mission critical, and maybe we need to make sure that this old 30-year-old Sun server doesn't die, right? We can figure it out. A scream test is one of the most valuable things that you can do in these sorts of situations. In fact, we've seen this scream test be implemented over the last couple of months since President Trump took office, right? Organizations, the Doge organization under Elon Musk have gone around and they just started yanking funding, right? In bulk. And what that does is it forces a scream test. Because then if things that are truly mission critical, truly absolutely mandatory, man, we got to have that up and running, people start screaming. And you can really start looking into it, right? And so a scream test is a very valuable thing in both in technical and funding environments. All over the map, scream tests are valuable. And so my inclination is, I'm glad this is happening. It's a scream test. Now, do I want to see F-Droid suffer? No, I don't. I would like to see F-Droid succeed. I have some qualms with F-Droid, with F-Droid's management. They're a little wacky. I have some qualms with their design, their engineering design. It's a little crusty and weird. Lots of issues. But I do like seeing free software and open source alternative app stores. I like that. That's a positive thing. So seeing them lose funding, well, that's no good. But on the other hand, I don't want to give them my money right now. So why would I want to be giving them my money at gunpoint? Which is what we have, the scenario we have right now. $800,000 given to Tor at gunpoint by U.S. taxpayers. Right? If you're a U.S. citizen and you pay taxes over the last several years, you gave money to Tor. Not a ton, but a little bit. Do you like that happened? See, I don't. Now, and I should be clear, many years back, I actually interviewed to be the director of Tor. and at the end of the interview process, this is a real story, by the way. This was many, many years back. For those of you who don't know, before I became the most hated man in open source and a tech journalist, I was an executive, an engineering executive in a number of companies. And at one point, it came up through some mutual colleagues that Tor needed a new executive director. And so we thought, you know what, this might be an interesting fit. So we had a number of conversations. We back and forth for a while. We had a series of interviews, essentially. And we talked about putting me in as the new executive director of the Onion Router Network. And at the end of it, the very last interview, we were doing it via video conferencing. And I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, you know what? Maybe this isn't right. I'm thinking this might not be the right fit. Where you guys want to go is not a place I want to travel down. Like that's a dark alley and road that I don't want to follow you down. And I don't know that I'd do a good job of representing Tor in that scenario. So we both agreed that, yeah, let's just part ways. But I do understand and appreciate, that's a long way of saying I appreciate what Tor is doing and there is value to it. But they're predominantly funded by the United States government, my taxpayer money. And honestly, I wouldn't choose to donate to them right now. I just wouldn't. I do see value in them, but in their current organization, with their the current people that are running it, again, all intertwined with the U.S. government and Mozilla and everything else, and how they're pushing things technologically, I just wouldn't fund them. But I'm forced to. And I don't think that's very cool. I don't think that's very cool at all. I'm going to keep an eye on all of this as the days push forward and see, will the judge grant them basically a restraining order that allows them to get these funds, right? Will that happen? Will will the Open Technology Fund get the taxpayer funding and then give those funds to Tor and F-Droid and Let's Encrypt and all the other projects that they push? I don't know. I don't know, but I'm gonna keep watching it, and I'm gonna keep shaking the trees, because there are so many bits of interconnected weirdness and shadiness here that you ever have the spidey sense something's wrong? Yeah, something's wrong here. Something's up. Something's amiss. Something is dirty, and I'm gonna keep digging until I figure out exactly what all the details are. And it could just be exactly what we've looked at today. It's just there's a whole lot of intertwinedness and a whole lot of self-serving, sitting on each other's boards and making sure everyone gets a lot of government grants sort of ugh. That could just be all it is, but I'm going to keep digging. Thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers who help make all this work possible. Go to lunduke.com and click on all those links. Watch the shows, listen to the shows, read all the stuff, interact with the Lunduke Journal anywhere you want from there. I'm on X, I'm on Locals, I'm on YouTube, I've got the audio podcast feed and Substack and Spotify and iTunes, I'm Patreon, I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere. I exist on all the platforms until the platforms kick me off. So go to lunduke.com and find your favorite way to enjoy the Lunduke Journal. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast. Click, and then another click. Man, I know how to click. Do I not know how to click? I know how to click.